How much time is too much time on video games, smartphones, or sitting in front of the TV? And do you have a sudden urge to Google the answer to that question? Well, don't. Instead, stay tuned as my very special guest joins me to talk about technology, social media, and kids next on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center. Name an electronic device and a kid is plugged into it, often to more than one device at a time. So what do we as parents need to know about how all that plugged in time is affecting our kids' brains, their social and emotional development, and their ability to be good citizens? Well, tonight's special guest is an expert in this area, and she's here to share her vast knowledge. We're not going to be able to tap into everything that she knows in 30 minutes, but we'll get a good start for you. So if you have a question or a comment on tonight's topic, call the numbers on your screen right now. Locally, dial 218-788-2844 or call toll-free at 1-877-307-8762. And you can also text us your questions or email them using the number or address listed at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be taking your questions during our entire show. And let me just say that the irony of us asking you to watch the show while texting or calling in questions at the same time is not lost on us. So let's meet our guest now. Erin Walsh is the founder of Mind Positive Parenting. She's worked with schools, parent groups, and youth serving organizations throughout the country. She's a national speaker and trainer on issues related to child development and digital media. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And I've been telling everyone, you are the Oprah guest of the season. You are. No pressure. No pressure.
I was going to say, the bar is high then. The bar is really high.
Because you're here by yourself, and there's no, I didn't invite anybody else because
it's a big couch. It's a big couch to fill.
And you have, but you have big knowledge.
I appreciate that. It's going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. Yeah. But here's where I want to start.
Yeah.
Because somebody said, well, are there like lots of experts in this field? I said, I don't know. And well, how did she come to this? I don't know. So how did you come to have this passion for this particular topic?
Yeah, it's a great question because I didn't come through a standard path. Actually, my parents started a nonprofit in Minneapolis, Minnesota when I was in high school. It was called the National Institute on Media and the Family. And its mission was to maximize the benefits and minimize the harms of media's impact on children's health and development. That all sounds really wonderful, except when you're a teenager. So I'm going to repeat that. I was a teenager at the time, so I hated my parents' life work. I thought it was a total, I wanted nothing to do with it because my relationship with their life work was arguments about why I had to get my homework done before I watched television and why I couldn't play the same video games my friends were watching. So I had a little bit of what I would call a rocky start in the field.
Yes.
But I think what happened is, like oftentimes happens when we're growing up, is those conversations planted some seeds. And as I got older and I started looking at the world around me, I was born on the edge of what we might call the digital revolution. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't have a cell phone in high school, but right as I hit college, these technologies were exploding. And as I started looking at the world around me and started thinking about how I was learning, how I was forming relationships, how I was finding information, I realized that you couldn't really think about what it meant to be in this world and how you wanted to be in it without thinking about the powerful role that digital technologies or screens were having in my life. So I ended up starting to do some work in college on it, and lo and behold, I thought, who could I collaborate on some of these campaigns I'm running as a young professional? I know, my dad. Yeah. So anyway, it's sort of a family business in some ways. I never would have predicted that this would have been my passion, but I think in the time that I have even been thinking about this since I was a teenager, obviously the technologies have exploded, the issues have exploded, the possibilities have expanded, but the risks have expanded as well. So it's certainly a dynamic field.
And there really is this generational difference because, you were just describing that cell phones coming into being when you were in college, and I'm going like, well, when I was in college, that's not what was happening. there's this generational divide here, which is then even now what you're saying for parents younger than you or for college-age students, they even have a different experience than what you had.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're seeing now that generational differences, it takes, it's only 2 years until new technologies are coming out that completely change the way that we're doing business. So, when I started doing internet safety workshops, Facebook wasn't even around. And now to talk about social media without talking about Facebook, I mean, that is what's defining the online social life of kids. So I think that the change, our motto is that if you blink, it will change. That is the lesson of the digital revolution. As soon as you think you have the latest device, something comes out the next week that is probably going to blow that one out of the water.
And although kids are always excited about it because they want the latest device and they want to learn that they want the newest edition, the newest version, and they want the newest thing, and parents are like, oh, I barely know this one. Why do can we put a moratorium? Can there be a law?
Can we stop for a year while I do some homework and catch up on, I just figured out what this site was about, and now you're on to the next thing. And I think that that's, in a lot of ways, we can just assume that our kids are a couple steps ahead of us, technically speaking. They are generally digitally far more savvy than us. That doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of skills to bring to the table that can really help them be great digital citizens and help them navigate this world.
I love what you just said. Stop worrying about the fact that your kids are 2 steps ahead, because they already are, but that does not diminish your ability to be the parent that you want to be and to be an effective parent in this age.
The worst thing that we can do is say, I don't understand it, so I'm just go out into the digital ocean, good luck out there. I think that we don't have to know the ins and out of every single level of every single video games our kids play in order to connect with them and help guide them through this new world. I think that some of the skills that we've had forever in terms of how do we communicate with each other, how do we set limits and consequences, how do we find balance and still have fun together playing video games but find other things to do. Those things are just as important now as they were 20 years ago.
And so let's take a step back. Because you and I talked a little bit about this, and I said, oh, I kind of still want to talk a little bit about TV.
Old
that
TV,
old thing,
it's still
that
around.
Old thing, although I hear like there's a new version coming out that has 8 times the HD. Well, I'll have to get that now. But let's talk a little bit about TV. And just kind of what we're doing, how TV watching is affecting kids' brains, what we still need to be concerned about with that.
TV, it's a great place to start, because I think while new social media sites are coming out, new video games are hitting the market, it takes a lot of the headlines. But when we look at the statistics, young people are still spending an extraordinary amount of time still watching standard old TV, the same kind of things. There might be 1,000 more channels, but the same sort of device that we grew up watching. And so it's important just because in terms of the time that young people, up to 25 hours a week is spent sitting in front of
that's like
the
a
television.
part-time job.
It's a part-time job.
Almost with benefits.
Yeah, and what we know is that kids are spending 53 hours a week with entertainment media on average, between 8 to 18-year-olds. So that's more than a full-time job. Solidly half of that is still the old television. And so we know that television, because it's the oldest sort of media device that we've had in our families, we have a ton of research on it. So we know that media stories, media plots, media images do influence kids. And one of the ways that we've talked about it for years is whoever tells the stories defines the culture. So, storytellers have always been powerful in communities. It's how we share our values, it's how we tell who we are and who we want to be. Stories haven't changed. The power of stories hasn't changed, but who's doing the storytelling has changed. We've, in many families, delegated that role to screen media. And unfortunately, the stories that screen media are telling our kids are oftentimes rich in violence, sexually inappropriate, all the sorts of things that aren't necessarily the things that we would want to be, the stories that we want to tell our kids in order to help them thrive. So for example, what's the impact of screen media? We know that, for example, watching positive pro-social TV helps kids be a little bit more sharing and pro-social. We also know that watching violent media and being exposed to violent television is related to desensitization to violence, to aggression, and to fear. And that's well-established research. So it's not so much is TV good or bad, but what stories are TV telling our kids?
Right, and I love what you just said, that if it's true, and we know it's true, because for the past 50 years it's been true, that violence has an effect on kids, that kids who watch violent images are more likely to behave in aggressive ways. But the opposite is also true, and that's what you just reminded us. So that was tip number 2, everybody. Did you hear that? Tip number 2 is that TV can be used for good as well, is what you're saying.
And I think we get into this argument. Is TV bad for kids or is it good for kids? Is it rotting their brains and making them be violent, or is it great? Well, what kind of TV are we watching and for how much of our day? If we're spending a little bit of a time watching think of all the transformative, powerful television shows that are on that have really taken the art of storytelling to new heights, inspired us to imagine and to learn about new things. At the same time, there are plenty of shows who dish out healthy portions of violence, and of course that's not good for our kids. All of the heavy hitters in child health and development have gone on record to say that there's a relationship between exposure to violent media and real-life fear, desensitization, and aggression.
Well, one of the statistics that I love, was in actually one of your dad's books,
Yeah.
was that there is more evidence supporting that violent images on screen result in aggressive behaviors in kids. There's more evidence for that than there is that lead poisoning results in brain damage.
Yeah.
And we all believe
that.
that.
We take for granted.
We take for granted.
Yeah,
Now
exactly.
we've got a ton of questions,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
means there are a ton of people who are multitasking
Yeah.
out there.
Excellent.
Woman from Duluth says, how do you control children's exposure to violence and advertising in the media? And so asking for like a parent tip on that.
Yeah, I think in terms of, especially for young kids, we want to make sure to limit their exposure. So part of that is just having good limits and consequences around screen media. So one of the things is getting background television off. So, if we're just eating or eating a meal and TV's on in the background, turn it off. Because oftentimes kids are sort of exposed to things that aren't necessarily appropriate in the background. And then just making sure to follow the ratings. So making sure that your kids are watching age-appropriate shows. Common Sense Media is an organization that does great ratings by parents, for parents, that can help us better understand, which shows are most appropriate for kids.
Common Sense Media, go check it out. Remember, Common Sense Media. So we're talking about screens, we're talking about TV. Let's get to video games now.
Yeah.
And video games, video gaming. Here's what I thought.
Yeah.
With all of the technology that's available in medicine, and you see a lot of this electronic things, and doctors are doing things electronically, and I've had the opportunity to view as a person sitting there watching somebody do a colonoscopy and the doctor's going like this, and it's like, oh my gosh, he's playing a video game.
It's a video game.
It is, it's a video game. And so I thought like, are there some good things to video games?
Yeah, and there's actually a study titled, Does Your Surgeon Play Video Games? Because we've seen actually that surgeons that play a lot of video games are actually better at their surgeries.
Oh, that's
it makes sense because it's eye-hand coordination. There's all these great things that can happen. Video games are excellent teachers. There's instant feedback loops. As soon as I do something, I get some sort of response. As I can sort of get things that are more challenging, specially tuned to my skills over time. It's the dream teaching device. So the question is, just like we talked about with television, what is it teaching? So I can get great eye-hand coordination in a role-play game that's helping me think sort of logically and collaborate with other team players. That's great. I could also get great eye-hand coordination by doing first-person shooter games for 6 people for 6 hours after school, but I'm also going to get a bunch of other ill effects from that exposure. And so we know that there are some great things about video games, and that we know that violent video games, for example, are also great at teaching aggression and violence.
And the attentional focusing required for video games are often different from the attentional focusing that you need to learn how to be a good student.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we are finding, so there's this, a parent came up to us a couple years ago and she said, I have to ask you something. I think I'm a little bit worried about my son's teacher because she said that he's having trouble focusing in class. And I think, I don't understand how that could be possible because my son has incredibly great focus. He comes home from school and plays video games for 4 solid hours. She must just not be a good enough teacher to captivate his attention and make him want to learn. So it was this great moment of, how can a kid who can spend 4 solid hours, that's incredible dedication, playing a video game not do well in school? And the answer has something to do with our attention systems. So there's different types of attention systems that we need for different tasks. And the one that we're using when we play video games is called our reactive attention system. It's located deep within our brain. It's when we see something zip across a stage or move and we pay attention to it. It's an automatic reflexive response.
And that's what allowed us to actually survive to this point of the digital age,
very
right?
helpful.
Because we saw the saber-toothed tiger run across and we go, that is a bad thing.
There's a reason we have our reactive attention systems. We are grateful for them. That's why you and I are here tonight. But there's another type of attention system that we need to do things that don't give you immediate feedback loops that don't zip across the page. And that's our focused attention system. It's actually located in our cortex. We use our cortex to practice focused attention. And it's something that we have to learn. It's something that we have to practice.
Front of the brain versus kind of deep down inside our brain.
Yes,
I can't really point to that part. Yeah.
Thank you. But it's the type that we're going to need to focus. If we're getting through a dense passage that we're assigned in an English class, it might be frustrating while we're getting through it, and none of the letters are moving, and nothing's giving me an extra samurai sword for doing a great job. But the reward is actually really quite great in terms of my learning, in terms of my imagination. And so we require focused attention to get through those things, you know, in order to get to that learning. So what we have is we have video games, apps, you know, all these things that are really well tuned to our reactive attention system. And we don't have as much practice for developing our focused attention system.
And so what's really interesting, so if there's some of you parents out there who are thinking like, oh, my child can be a surgeon if they play more video games because that is what Erin Walsh said on the show, I want to remind you that they have to get through medical school first.
Yes.
So we have to have a balance of those video games, and we have to have a balance of the kind of attentional focusing tasks that make you good in learning school the way we do school in this country then.
Very well said. I mean, I think that we need to know that there are some positive attributes to video games, there's some risk things, but basically if we can think about having some sort of limits, if parents can think about time and content. So content we already talked about, follow the ratings, get age-appropriate content, and then is it balanced with those other things? Are they getting practice with all the other, you know, getting outside and running around, kicking things, you know, kicking a ball, doing sports, getting through those dense, you know, passages in class. And then, sure, gaming a little bit every now and then is not a big deal.
Now, here's another question from a woman in Fish Lake. Has a 5-year-old who watches Netflix. What is the recommended allotted time to watch, and how can I get her to do more reading?
Yeah, great question. So the American Academy of Pediatrics has released sort of some of their recommendations. And basically the recommendation is under 2, no screen time for babies under 2. Mostly because babies have all sorts of extraordinary work that they need to be doing during that time, that screens don't really help them get better at those things that they need to be doing. Language and physical development, all those things.
Exploration.
Doing all those, you know, figuring out what things taste like and what they feel like and all that incredible
and
stuff.
how my body works, right?
Yeah,
how can I learn to walk? So.
Yeah, I think that a lot, you know, we think, oh, this little app will help teach my child how to read, when really just talking to your child is the best thing that we can do to teach them how to read. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no screen time for babies under 2. We're a far cry from that right now in this country, but that's the official recommendation. After that, in early childhood, it's recommended 1 hour a day. And then by school age, it's 2 hours a day of entertainment media is the recommendation.
This is great knowledge, and I didn't know this. This is really great knowledge out there. And so that's the challenge for all of you out there, is maybe one of the things that you're going to want to do is do a little diary for a week. How much time, how old are your kids? What kind of screen time are they getting? And see if you're coming anywhere close to what Erin just told us.
Yeah, because if we're thinking national average is 53, and you know we're thinking about 14. So part of it is what's reasonable for your family. Take the baseline and then set some goals. Let's reduce screen time by an hour this week as a family. One thing you could do is have screen time tickets. You know, a half hour, you get 4 tickets a day for a half hour. Once the tickets are used up, screens are off.
Love it. Texting. The new way of communicating, some people seem to have lost the ability to talk. This is my observation. There's nothing.
LOL.
There's nothing scientific about what I just said. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Just an observation. Yeah, texting is by far the #1 preferred form of communication for young people. You know, they text more than we can imagine. So repetitive stress syndrome in many kids' thumbs. And you know, texting in many ways, it keeps kids connected, but I think what we have to watch out for is that it's not an avoidance strategy. So as opposed to doing the hard work of coming face to face with you and having a hard conversation, or talking about something that really means something and figuring out that emotional communication, that we avoid that by sending a text.
And this is where we talk about how technology is beginning to affect our emotional and social development too. That part of how I learn social skills is by engaging in a conversation with you, and I mean like using my words, right? Not my thumbs.
Yeah.
So
like actually doing this thing.
Actually doing
this is quite
thing.
radical,
Right,
what we're doing right now.
So we're modeling. We're modeling for all of you out there.
Yeah.
And so what are good things about, you know, we know one good thing about it is the Text for Life program, which we talked about earlier in the year, and if you missed that, you want to take a look at our suicide prevention show. But good thing about text, not so good about text?
You know, the great thing about texting is that, you know, it will be comforting to parents to know that one of the major people that young people text are their parents. So there is sort of this connectivity that happens around staying connected with folks. There's just a logistical convenience to texting where you are and staying that sort of, that feeling that even though we're not together, that we're sort of tethered to one another in some way. And oftentimes that is really happening between parents and kids. And so I think that, you know, texting in many ways is just a new form of communication. I think the negative part is when it starts to be, there's a couple things. One is when we start texting all night long. And so parents really need to watch to make sure that there's some sort of tech curfew around texting.
Yeah, or turn your phones in at 9
Yeah,
o'clock.
because, you know, there's no way to learn the next day when you've gotten 100 texts between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. It's just, there's not enough time for sleep. And then the other is just what you're saying. So if we find that we're using texting as a crutch to replace human interaction, then it's time to sort of reel back on that and start to think about when is this convenient and when do I need to just put the phone away and go face somebody and have a conversation.
Social media.
Yeah.
It's the biggie.
Exploding.
It's exploding. And let's see, here we have here we have a question from a woman in Duluth. And I know that this is heavy on many parents' minds, but may not be the only thing that we should be talking about social media. What is the best way to talk with my teenager about the importance of safety on social networking sites? So safety, safety, safety. That's that's #1 parent issue.
Yeah, and I think that it's a fine place to start. I mean, I think that what we say is much like many things with working with our kids is talk early and talk often. So don't wait until there's an internet incident or you feel like your child is in an unsafe situation to have the talk or to set some sort of baseline. So as your kid starts adopting more and more advanced or expansive digital tools, make sure that you're having those conversations about what are the rules to the road, what are the expectations, what are the consequences if they don't follow through on those responsibilities that they've said that they'll do in order for the privilege of having the phone or having the Facebook site. And a lot of those are things that we need to revisit over time, because most kids, after they've had the talk, they'll just say, oh yeah, I know this and I know that. But it might happen anyway, because it's an emotionally impulsive act that we find, oh, I slipped up, I wasn't thinking about it, so I did this.
And kids are that way anyway. I mean, that's the nature of the beast, of the child, and certainly of teenagers, right? Is that this thing that feels good right now, I will even risk getting in trouble, because my brain says, I will risk getting in trouble because this thing feels good right now.
And maybe there's a lot of friends hanging out and this thing is happening. So kids can oftentimes recite internet safety tips, but then we find that they might make some mistakes anyway. And part of that is just part of growing up. And so repeat that conversation often. Check in. How are things going? Where are you online? What are you up to? And really invite, especially as kids get older, invite them into the conversation. How are you feeling? What are the things that you want to make sure you want a part of your digital life? And so limits, consequences, and conversations, and making sure that everybody's clear what the rules are to the digital road, and then making sure that you're checking in with them and that you're trying to figure out where they've been and what they've been up to.
And then how does digital citizenship fit into all of this, especially with the social media and that concept of cyberbullying, et cetera, et cetera?
You know, I think the digital citizenship concept has evolved out of the internet safety conversation. If we think about the internet safety conversation as sort of the baseline, how do we make sure that we are as safe as possible, that we don't get into any really high risk, sort of manage the risks? And the digital citizenship conversation, I think, calls for us to go farther than that and to say, how can we contribute positively to the digital spaces that we're in? How do we behave well? How do we build a more thriving community using these digital tools? So it begs questions about how do we treat one another more respectfully. It asks, kids today have a digital footprint practically from the time that they're born, from the first, pictures that their parents post online. So taking some sort of ownership and asking young people to say, let's not just be safe, let's be a good digital citizen. How do you want to take ownership over your digital footprint and make it something great?
And that to me, though, implies that parents need to be doing a little bit of role modeling in here, too.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, I don't think it's just, we don't really mean your teenager should be a good digital citizenship, but you are off the hook. And so I think about that with the parents who are checking emails at the dinner table, or parents who are not necessarily themselves being diligent about what they're putting on their Facebook sites. In fact, I was just talking with one of the docs on call about are you on Facebook? Heck no, I'm not on Facebook. But that idea of having to be mindful about the fact of we are creating this life out there that there might not be a go back on.
Yeah. I think this idea of think before you post and thinking, you know, am I comfortable with the whole world seeing this? That's something that we as adults need to be just as cognizant of as our kids. We need to make sure that we aren't, you know, using our phones at dinner also. There's a ton of modeling that goes on. You know, I was saying today that my friend's 3-year-old son staged an intervention a couple weeks ago. He put his 3-year-old pudgy little hand over my friend's BlackBerry and said, "Daddy, put that away, I'm trying to talk to you." And what a powerful moment when, you know, so often we say, oh, kids these days, what is going on with them? But I think we also need to take a look in the mirror and really think about how are we using these technologies? Are they feeding us? Are they helping us be the better person that we want to be and the family that we want to be? Or are they starting to kind of erode that?
What are your 3 favorite things about this digital age?
The digital age. You know, there's a lot to be excited about. I obviously have a lot of concerns. We've talked about a couple of them, but you know, I'm really, really excited about the possibility for connection because I think I work with a lot of young people, and I know that some young people feel isolated and don't feel like they have connectedness. And this is a way actually to sort of explode geography and sort of connect young people and have them help collaborate, get them in touch with adult mentors in ways that we never could have imagined just a while ago. So I love connectedness. Access to information is just so exciting. And then finally, just the creative potential. I think there's a lot of ways that young people and adults alike can start creating things in the world using digital tools and sharing them.
And I certainly think with that what you said about connectedness, what we find are a lot of people, even adults, who at one point in time in the non-digital age would have been shut-ins and would not have had access to other people and have those kind of relationships that even if they're digital relationships, if that's more than nothing, that's a better thing. That's a better thing for somebody who maybe has some disabilities and that they are less physically mobile and they're less able to maybe even emotionally get out in the world, but to be able to have some connections in life, that cannot be a bad thing.
No, there's exciting possibilities now, and I think especially when we start balancing those with real world activities. So how can we have online collaboration that then requires us to go do something together in the real world, and how can we start moving through these spaces so that we have kids that are sort of bilingual? They can be digital, you know, they can do that, but they also remember the, you know, the gifts that maybe we grew up with.
We are up, and Joe, my timekeeper, is going to start doing the this, and then he's going to start slicing his throat across me, and he's like, "Get us off the air." She was so fabulous, wasn't she? I felt like I could have talked with her for an hour and a half, or 2 hours. We'll just have to have her back. So thanks again to all of you for being here. Don't forget to visit us on the web at speakyourmindonline.org, another piece of technology where you can find a schedule of our topics and resource links, and read my blog, the place where I answer more of your questions. And you can also email us your questions about next week's show, when we'll be talking about sexual abuse, sexual assault, and sex trafficking. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps. Thanks for watching, and good night.